The Trump administration's America First agenda is expected to have a significant impact on U.S.-Africa economic relations, influencing trade, investment, and aid policies. But there's a lot to unpack here, and joining me, I have Professor Waldo Krugell, an economist from Northwest University. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining me today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so interestingly, we're seeing that again, Trump pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement, claiming that climate extremism has exploded inflation and overburdened businesses with regulation. Before we move on, talk to us. What do you make of that?
It's a difficult one to figure out. He's clearly against the climate movement, and there are a number of executive orders related to the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, further drilling for oil and gas resources in the U.S., changing regulations around exhaust pipe regulations for cars, offshore wind farms, that's also being influenced. So there's a raft of those, and he's clearly repositioning the U.S. In terms of renewable energies versus the more coal-fired ones. I don't think there's a lot of truth in the fact that it exploded inflation. The inflation story is much more complicated than that, but that's the story he's sticking to, and he's clearly made some major moves in this realm, which I think is a pity for international collaboration on this.
Well, we're also not unaware of the connection between his withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and drill, baby, drill. I'm sure you've sort of alluded to it in one way or the other. And this sort of aligns with, the American, there's this thing it's called, specifically calls it unleashing American energy. So talk to us about this, the impact this would have on crude oil prices and, of course, OPEC countries. I mean, what impact do you think it will have on crude oil prices?
It's an interesting one. I think U.S. oil production has increased over the last number of years, and they are a major supplier to their own economy and abroad. So in that sense, American energy is already playing a major role in the international market. His talk of just increasing supply significantly and pushing down oil prices, I'm not sure if that's completely realistic. Now, first off, it'll take some time to develop these resources. And you're contributing to a huge international market. So, yes, maybe it does change the outlook for the oil price a bit. But at the moment, I think the oil price is much more a product of international demand than it is of supply. You also mentioned just topping up their strategic reserves again. And that's true. That's been at the lower end of the historical trend. So maybe they'll try and do that. But there are physical limitations to that as well. So we'll have to see how this plays out. There hasn't been a lot of action in the oil price today, but we'll keep an eye on it going forward.
All right. So now I want us to specifically look at Nigeria, because Nigeria's proposed 2025 budget pegs crude oil at $75 per barrel. Now, first, what's your outlook for prices? And how do you think Nigeria will be able to navigate this? I mean, looking at what America plans to do with Trump as the president.
I think the $75, it was not unrealistic up until now. Somewhere between 70 and 80 is a good ballpark figure. In the balance of forces that drives the oil price, we know that there's, from time to time, there's an increase in demand. There's particularly in cold weather in the northern hemisphere. The increased sanctions on Russian oil exports notched up the price slightly above 80 recently. But then again, on the demand side, there's not a lot of demand at the moment. Even with 5% economic growth, the Chinese are not demanding oil like they did in the past. So his plans might push down the oil price in the longer run, but these plans take time to execute. To develop those resources requires funding and just physical construction time. So in the short run, they shouldn't have too much of an impact.
Well, that's quite interesting. Thank you so much. Well, I'm also joined by Cheta Nwanze, lead partner, lead partner, SBM Intelligence. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Good morning to you too. So I'd like you to take it up from where Professor stopped, talking about Nigeria's 2025 budget and, of course, pegging price at $75. Talk to us about this and maybe other impacts you think, Nigeria would have to deal with as a result of a Trump presidency.
Well, there are so many things that Nigeria and the continent as a whole will have to deal with. Personally, I think that his announcement yesterday will affect the price of oil eventually. Yes, there's not going to be movement immediately, but over the course of the year, the oil price is going to drop precipitously because one of the things that has happened recently is whenever the shale providers come online, oil price gets affected. So that is definitely going to happen. He's going to come up with policies that are very friendly to them. So I think that oil prices will hover around, will swing around. Of course, it's not going to be $60 for the entire year, but it will swing around that, which is basically $15 shortfall per barrel on what we are budgeting. And that is not very good for us. So we need to come up with something very quickly because there's going to be a revenue shortfall for us, and that is problematic.
How do we navigate this, really? I mean, the revenue shortfall, saying that already we have a deficit pegged at 13 trillion naira. So how do we do all of this?
Frankly, I don't have answers for that. I would leave the answers for that to the eggheads around the president, because I think that there are so many assumptions that are wrong with that are flawed with the budget. For a start, I also think that the naira dollar peg for the entire year is also flawed. I think that the oil production numbers that they are assuming that we will make are also flawed. So we have that triple whammy that is coming. I think that the only way we probably will be able to do it will be policies that will be very friendly to businesses, so that businesses can actually produce the tax revenue that is needed. But one of the key things that we need to do, and we now need to do it very urgently, is the president's tax reform agenda. We need to get that through the door. We need to get that through the door yesterday.
All right, I guess you're done talking.
Yes, I am.
Okay, I couldn't see you, so I didn't know. All right. Now, let me bring this to you before I go back to Professor. I mean, Trump has been clear with his America First trade policy, and he did not waste time as that formed part of his presidential actions on inauguration day, because there were so many things, and all that. So how do you think this will impact global trade? I mean, globally speaking, now, how is it going to impact global trade, especially Africa?
Well, I think there are two important things to point out. Number one, he didn't even invite any African leader. He broke with protocol and invited leaders from other countries. So Giorgia Meloni from Italy was there. Milei from Argentina was there. He had invited Xi Jinping. He had invited Benjamin Netanyahu. Both of them declined to come. But he didn't bother to invite any African leader. Remember that during his first presidency, he didn't come to Africa. Africa does not interest him, but we can't run away from the fact that U.S. policies will affect Africa. And I think the key policy to watch is if he really goes after the Panama Canal, it will signal a new era of might is right in global geopolitics, and that will have tremendous ripple effects on trade globally. As more countries will go, so we'll see a return to spheres of influence kind of politics. There's some Worthington kind of geopolitics, and that's the truth of the matter. The sad reality of the matter is that pretty much every African country at this point is weak and dependent on one external backer or the other. So a return to might is right geopolitics, and overt return to might is right geopolitics does not signal well for the continent at all.
Right. Professor, let me get your thoughts on that before we move on.
I think in addition to those points, my main concern is that the Trump administration is going to undermine a rules-based system internationally. In the past 25 years, we've seen sort of growth in international trade and growth of economies across the world, but within the framework of WTO rules, that was clear. And now he's sort of moving beyond that. And my main worry is that once these rules are loosened up and people pay less attention to them, you could end up seeing all these sort of mini trade wars, disputes about specific products, items that end up with additional tariffs on them, and really to the detriment of African exporters. So it's much better to work within the rules-based system than what he's currently proposing beyond that, with much more individual agreements and a transactional approach to international trade.
Right. Let me come to you, Mr. Nwanze. I want you to look at this. We're seeing that Trump's presidency has been associated with sustained monetary tightening as a result of, high inflationary pressures, disruption in commodity prices, reversing prior rate cut benefits, and weakening currencies across emerging markets. Now, that simply put sounds like re-dollarization. Do you share the same sentiment? What do you make of this?
Well, we've been going through that for the past 8 years. It started under Trump 1, and the truth of the matter is that Biden continued this with the Inflation Reduction Act. If we've not adapted to it by now, then the blame is on us. We will only see it accelerated. Trump is unashamedly America first. So we have to get used to that reality. We have to understand that at the end of the day, in terms of geopolitics, economics, whatever we want to talk about, we should always look to our interests and how to protect our interests. But then what I worry about Nigeria specifically, but a majority of sub-Saharan African countries in general, is that we haven't even defined what our interests are. We don't know what our interests are. So how do you pursue your interests when you don't even know what they are? So what that means is that we are going to end up, very unfortunately, as the playthings of the group of the great powers as they get more involved in great power politics on our continent.
Right. I was going to ask you, what's BRICS, if we could get some maybe headroom as a result of BRICS, but we're pressed for time. I may not be able to take that. But Professor, if you could just say something in 30 seconds or less so we can close.
I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the air, whether it's trade, whether it's the impact of Trump's domestic policies on their interest rates and exchange rate, whether it's the South Africans are particularly worried about the AGOA agreement. And uncertainty is never a good thing. It increases the cost of doing business. And I think, like my colleague said, it really necessitates that we get all our ducks in a row, get reforms going, to make us less vulnerable to international forces and these uncertainties.
All right, thank you so much, Professor Waldo Krugell, for your thoughts on the show today. And of course, thanks to you too, Cheta Nwanze, for your thoughts on the show.
Thank you.